Okay, so for those watching at home, this is a little homemade web series we're doing here, just because in our backyard of Brisbane, a few like-minded people like Darius Boyd and myself really want to sort of share the love and spread the word around, emotional challenges and mental health. And this is our second take. So we've just kind of gotten into some conversation and realised the sound wasn't plugged in. So Darius was just telling me that he's a captain of the Brisbane Broncos. For anybody that doesn't know about the Brisbane Broncos, they're kind of the NRL team in Brisbane. Is there only one NRL?
There's only one, yeah.
Weren't the Cowboys somewhere?
The Cowboys, North Queensland.
Queensland.
Yeah, so
okay.
Gold Coast Titans, but
yeah,
Brisbane.
And Darius was just telling me that it was a young team. Now Darius is 32 this year, but and we were talking about young guys that kick off at 18, and they're often probably quite green to this whole arena of fame and
there's a lot of money, fame, just even coming from challenging backgrounds or media scrutiny and attention. Social media is a big thing these days as well, which I think young ones struggle with, and we all probably struggle with. I don't have it personally because I wouldn't probably handle it very well, and can only imagine what young brains are seeing at certain ages that probably aren't ready to handle it too. So definitely challenging times being a young one growing up these days, that's for sure.
And I also think with social media, I just thank God there wasn't any social media around in my bloody rite of passage. 15 to 25 is a messy time. Adolescence is a really challenging time. And to have a lot of that captured, I just think some stuff, that is a challenge. But we were also talking about, because I mentioned to you that I've worked with other young men and being a mum of sons, and you're about to be a dad of 2 daughters, so you've got your work cut out with you managing estrogen, let me tell you that. Yeah. I sort of have found my desire to learn more about how to chat to males, because when I grew up in my family of origin, and I'm, I often say if you've seen the movie Once Were Warriors, I kind of felt like Jake the Muss was very much the landscape in my family of origin, and I was scared of males. I had a very ill pedophile next door, didn't like being a little girl, didn't have much connection. And like many troubled teenage girls and adolescents, I discovered booze and drugs. And when I'm doing training, for psych students that want to do trauma and drug and alcohol, I always sort of say, look, for some people that have emotional pain, booze and drugs are keeping them alive. It's an anaesthetic. When you haven't got any other tools and you've got perhaps a single parent looking after you, and single parents are kind of running on half steam anyway, and you're trying to bring up kids, it can be a challenge. And so I have always had an interest in being given 2 young sons and being a single mum, learning to what I call articulate, and that's talk to a young male's heart, having had no landscape on how that sounds without the absence of a dad, and I think... I remember a therapist saying to me in my early years that cross-gender relationship, a little boy's first love affair is with his mum's heart, and a little girl's first love affair is with her father. A little girl's first hero is her mum, and a little boy's first hero is their dad. Now, if those relationships are fractured, or if the parent has armour on their heart, like the library doors to their heart are locked and bolted, the child doesn't get an emotional education. They might be physically strong and smart. And I have all my clients are high achievers. They're either elite athletes or they're academics. So they're really good in that ego self. They can think for themselves, or they're actresses or models, or very good in their physical form, Olympians. But when it comes to behind closed doors, trying to find language, they struggle, which is, I suppose, you teach what you need to learn. And I suppose... Just as I sort of say that, and your little one's 4, but she'd be starting to boss you around a bit by now, I would imagine.
4 going on 14, I think.
Is she?
Yeah, I think so. She's good. She's really good, but at the same time, I know they're starting to learn everything. They understand what they want when they want it. They think please and thank you means they get it every time. So it's just it's kids, I guess, but it's part and parcel of it. But it's enjoyable.
Yeah. Do you find that you surprise yourself, when she asks you things? I mean, I suppose at 4, the complexity of questions may not be, but you sort of find yourself, because as parents, we've got to model something. And I always think of that Telstra ad, you know, when the little boy's asking why there's a Great Wall of China and the dad says to keep the rabbits out. I mean, that's kind of an answer I would have come up with because I had no geography knowledge.
Oh, no, it's weird, I suppose. I didn't have a massive family growing up. I never met my father. And
Ever?
No, never. And my mum was great, but she suffered with some mental health issues when I was about 15 and kind of lived with my grandma for a little bit there too. So I suppose I didn't have the best, what's the word I'm looking for, probably, mentors or I suppose model to look at as being a parent, I guess. And never known my father, never knew how to be a father or see what a father's like. But I suppose you see different things. I mean, not saying movies are great to go off, but you see your friends having fathers around and what they kind of do and how they act. And I suppose I've seen a therapist plenty of times, still do to this day, and he used to always say to me before I had Willow was that you can look at it two ways. There's one that you haven't had a really bad upbringing from a father in particular, that you don't have to change that, or that's the only model you have. But then you don't have a really good one either, so you can kind of make it up yourself. You can take bits of different people that you've seen, some mentors or coaches that you've come across, or school teachers, or you know your mates' fathers if they seem like good fellas or good blokes, and you can try and take a little bit of everyone and put it into your own way you father your kids. And I have my moments, but I think I'm doing a pretty good job so far, and I think he was pretty right with that. I think it's good to kind of make it up as you go, and hopefully pick the best parts out of different people and try and be the best, you know, father or whatever you can be.
Yeah, because unlearning is hard. You know, when you've got a program downloaded that you've got to, you know, I say to a lot of people that come and work with me, the emotional detox, you kind of got to clear the crap out before. Sometimes you've got to dismantle a house before you can build a new one. The destruction precedes construction. Yeah. And I think, but also too, when I have clients come to me, and I find it a lot with the males that I work with between 15 and 25, often talk about anxiety. And sometimes I notice the anxiety and depression more prevalent in the gladiator men, you know, that are kind of, they know how to provide and protect, and they know how to stand up for themselves and drive themselves forward. But when it comes to the, you know, the complexities of emotional dialogue, if you haven't had that, and as you sort of said, you know, 15 to 25, and at 15, you know, your mum, you know, obviously had her challenges, and you know, being a mum of young sons, I mean, you know, we're certainly not here to make anybody a hero or a villain. Parents always just do what they can with the tools that they've got. But at that point in time in your life, you know, when the hormones start to kick in, a young male kind of needs to learn how the partnership looks. You know, whether you're heterosexual or homosexual, you know, when I work with same-sex couples, you still need to learn how to partner. You know, you still need to learn how to negotiate and argue, not fight. And when I'm working with parents of adolescents that go, oh, my bloody child drives me crazy. They just want to pick an argument the whole time. I say, well, argue with them. Don't fight, but argue. And the difference between fighting and arguing, you know, an argument is where you debate, you disagree without disrespect, you resolve and then evolve through the conflict. But if you haven't learned how to do that, you kind of go into fight or flight. You don't have the argument. And many of my elite athletes, especially, I remember this one soldier in particular saying, you know, well, I go for a run, I go train, and then I come back, I'm in a better place. But I see for a lot of fit blokes that they sometimes divert into their body, they kind of go into their shell, into their physical body. They come back and they feel better, but the argument's kind of still hanging in the air. But your little 4-year-old, now she's going to, you know, and again, I think there's a divine, I don't know how the universe works, but I kind of think, you know, learning how to debate with my 3, 4 and 5-year-old boys, because they know everything around that age and they just know more and more when they get older. But I think our job as parents, that cross-gender relationship, to disagree with them and set the boundaries, like you sort of said, please and thank you don't mean every time, which is, you know, manners are great, but that's a hard lesson at 4, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose it's talking about this other day. I think I was talking about it with my wife or someone. I can't remember. I think it was. Yeah, we were just talking about you know, you get the kids to learn how to swim or ride their first bike. You know, all these different things that they grow up doing, and you're kind of thinking. Someone said don't use floaties, and someone said they should be doing this and they should be doing that, and it's kind of all. In the end of the day, like you said before, you do the best you can with what you got, but you kind of, you know, parenting, there's no one set rule. So I think obviously you want to teach them manners and respect and, you know, being humble and grateful and all those type of things. But along the way, you kind of just do the best you can with what you got as well. Like you said that before, and I think I was saying if your son or daughter learns to swim at 2 or they learn to swim at 4, what's the difference? You know, as long as they learn, you know, as long as they get there eventually, I think that's kind of the key. And we all have different things. We all have, you know, some people have money and some people don't. You just can kind of do what you got and do your best you can. And almost like I said before, they have those qualities you want them to, you know, please and thank you and respect, and they know the value of $1, and they have, you know, empathy and love and all that type of stuff. I think you've done a good job.
You have done a lot of work on yourself for a 32-year-old man, just nailing all a young dad. My God.
Yeah, I've had my challenge. I went to a mental health clinic about 5 years ago now.
Yeah.
It's probably the best thing I ever did for myself personally.
Yeah.
I'd probably I was probably thought to myself, it was hard done by with my childhood. Like I said before, not meeting my father. My mum became ill when I was 15. I had to move in with my grandmother. My uncle and grandfather passed away when I was pretty young. So it was kind of me and my grandma. I cut my mother off because just really didn't understand at 15 why she was kind of leaving me by myself. That's the way I thought it was anyway. I didn't understand what she was going through. And I just had like this chip on my shoulder and I was quite angry. And rugby league was my one goal and passion. And I was lucky enough to play that and get into the teams. But as the years went on and the media scrutiny and pressure and
it's brutal,
you know,
isn't it?
relationships, friendships, all those type of things you go through. And I just really didn't know how to, you know, talk to people, open up. I didn't have, you know, mentors or anyone I could talk to and really, I suppose, model how I should be as a person or a human. It's got too much for me in the end. I had to, you know, sort myself out, and I was seeing a therapist for a few years, but I didn't think an hour session, you know, once a fortnight or once a month was enough in my busy schedule. Well, it wasn't enough. I felt like I had 10 things to talk about and an hour a month to talk about them. So,
And it takes you half an hour to warm up.
well, yeah, it's just what's in front of your brain at the moment, but it's not always, you know, what's really going on or what's deep down. So I went 3 weeks to a clinic down in Wentworthville. It was just an attitude change for me, I think, really. It was just the things I spoke about before, empathy, gratitude, you know, those type of things that I didn't have. And I was so focused on all the negatives instead of the positives. I mean, I had a great career, I had a wife, you know, I had dogs, car, house, you know, all these things that I'm really grateful for. My grandmother was alive still looking after her and helping her out and coming back to visit when I could. And
So sorry, I just forgot the timeline. Were you a dad? Were you a dad when you went? Right, okay. So you did the detox before you became a dad.
Yeah,
well
I've
done.
done it the right way, I think.
Yeah.
You know, even just like I'm finishing up my rugby league career in the next couple of years, and I think I really would have hit a wall if I hadn't done this beforehand. Just, I suppose, retiring, going into a new phase of life. A lot of sports people, athletes really struggle in retirement, you know, finding yourself, what your next career is going to be. You lose, I suppose, your profile and who you are and who you've been for so long. And I'm sure I'll struggle at some point to it. It's going to be a challenge, but I think I'll be well more equipped to handle it now that I've seen probably the darkest time of my life a few years ago now. And I still have challenges. We all still have challenges, but I handle them a lot better. Like you were saying before, I force myself to go out, you know, and do things. If I've had a bad day, you force yourself to go and do something, get out of the house, or go spend time with your wife and family, or go to the beach, whatever it is, and you come back and you feel better about it. And that's something that, you know, I've learned over the years, and I think practice makes perfect in anything, and it's the same with your mental health. If you're practicing good habits, you're gonna do well.
I think, you know, you said some really interesting stuff there, and you know, I too, you know, anyone listening to this, you know, if you've had a complicated family of origin, you know, it's easy to get confused and angry and pissed off in adolescence. Now, adolescents are angry and pissed off even if you come from bloody your father's Dr. Phil and your mum's Mother Teresa. That's kind of the angst of teenage years where you're trying to push up against. But I think, you know, in your 30s, you know, they often sort of say adolescence are the anxiety grounding years. And I always love, you know, I talk in word pictures. I'm not a clinician. I don't ever pretend to be. I'm a writer and a storyteller. And what I've been really grateful for is when clinical people have unpacked stuff in a story. So any book I write's got cartoon characters or finger puppets or bloody pictures of flaming hearts or whatever, because I just find, you know, before we had psychiatry and psychology, myths and legends, you know, the whole Game of Thrones archetypes were how we, you know, generations passed on information. And I think it's interesting too, where it's easy to get lost. You know, we were talking about cutting and pasting earlier with mentors, but do you have any siblings?
No, only child.
So that's tricky, hey? Because, you know, you'll notice with your two daughters when you have them, you learn compromise and you learn how to argue well with a sibling. They're great skill sets. And whenever I do talks for kids before they go to school each week, and it doesn't matter what, you know, it's an all girls or all boys school, you know, what I'll say to them is, I want you to get a visual. Your internal world operates really like traffic lights. It's just not that complicated. And you get stop, go and wait. And in childhood, you know, 0 to adolescence, mum and dad do, you know with your daughter, Willow, stop, go and wait are all your call. You're 24/7 boss management. That's our role to keep them safe. Stop, go and wait. But once you hit adolescence, you know, and in tribal cultures, it's usually around 12, and there's a rite of passage. But we have being a pissed idiot as schoolies as our rite of passage. But in rite of passage, I say to these adolescents, what you've got to understand is adolescence is called the anxiety years, and for a good reason, because you need to, by the time you hit adolescence, you can do stop and go. You know when to, you know, stop and go, but wait is the yellow light. And that's going to be with you forever because you're going to have to lay some new train tracks, some new scripting. And this is just my take, but I always say in a tribe, Mother Nature doesn't do duplicates. You know, you've got the sportsmen. I mean, you probably would have been a hunter. You wouldn't have been chasing a football. You'd probably be chasing a woolly mammoth or something. But, you know, the fit, athletic gladiator men kind of, you know, go and hunt or protect the tribe. You know, you've got your fishermen, you've got your bean counters, you've got your medicine men. A tribe to be diverse has to have all those different characters. And I say to these adolescent kids, what you've got to understand is that you are about to individuate and find your own yellow light that's going to operate very differently to everybody else. And I get them to imagine 10 different dog species because we have, you know, they're all canines, but we have this diversity. We use shepherds for police dogs. We use labs for seeing eye dogs. We use Rotties and, you know, Doberman for guard dogs, you know, right down to cattle dogs and little handbag fluffy dogs that are just cute and cuddly. Now, none of them are superior or inferior, but the temperament is best suited to certain dynamics. And I believe it's not a limitation, it's a gift. We've all got temperaments that are natural gifts. You know, I'm sure you've been told you don't get to be a captain of the Broncos without a gift. I mean, my husband's an engineer. He's got a gift with engineering stuff. So that's kind of your calling. It's a no-brainer. It's just comes through you. The trouble is that in Western culture, when we're downloading this yellow light, which we call anxiety, and you know when your daughter starts to date and she's anxious, you're going to sit with her and say, well, sweetheart, of course you were. Dad was anxious when I went on a date and, you know, make sure he treats you like a gentleman, and if you feel uncomfortable, you'll give her and you'll talk her through her anxiety. And what she'll do is download that app. And hopefully as parents, when we pass, our children have got all our parental apps downloaded that they don't need us there. But the thing is, to the individuation, I'm a German Shepherd. My sister was kind of like a greyhound and my mother's like a fluffy little Chihuahua dog. I can't take weight cues from a smaller dog. Now, in a family like yourself where there's no siblings and no granddad and dad, and I remember my therapist saying to me, Cynthia, you're a great mother, but you're a shit father. You don't know how to do testosterone. You've never had a male vehicle. Your boys are going to need men. And this is why I often notice that many of the young men that do well in football or any kind of team sport, in that they find the diversity of the dogs, you know, because there are obviously, well, you correct me if I'm wrong here, but there are certain men that are born, no, I could be showing my ignorance here, but I would imagine there's certain positions on a football team that some people are just gifted for.
Yeah, it's different. Yeah, they're all different. Yeah, you got your big guys, the little ones, the smart ones, creators, the guys that are just the hard ones that just rock it up, and their job's to be the strong one out of the team. So there's different. There's ones with a lot of skill and ability, and the other ones are just the guys that get you going forward, and the big, hard, strong, guys as well. So it's definitely, I get what you're saying. It's definitely a mixture of people in the team that you need, different, I suppose, attributes to be in the team, and not all the same. We're very different.
But to be a captain. Now, explain this to me. To be a captain of a team, does that mean you've got to be quiet? You've got to have a little bit of everything? What does that mean?
I suppose, experience is definitely one. I'm not one of the oldest in the team now. I've played a handful of games, and I've played for different, I've played rep teams, Queensland and Australia. I've been very lucky to do some of the things I've been able to achieve. So I'm probably the most experienced. I've played probably at the highest level as well, and probably more so. I think the challenges I've faced, like I said before, about the clinic and that, and some of the things I've been able to change in my life in particular. I think I've definitely grown up. I mean, 6-7 years ago, the furthest person away from being a captain of a team. I was just couldn't communicate, couldn't talk to people, very angry, closed off. I was very far away from being a captain. So even when I first got the job about 3 years ago, probably wasn't something that has always been in me personally. I've never been a leader. I'm an introvert. I don't talk. I'm not the loudest person in the room. I only speak up when I think things need to be said. But in saying that, rugby league's one thing that I've been doing since I was 6 years old, so I know it like the back of my hand. Like I said before, I'm probably grown into the role of the captaincy just because, like I said, with those couple of things before, I played at the highest level. I've played for such a long time. I'm one of the oldest in the team. I'm very experienced now as well, and I probably read the game pretty well as being an older one, and probably I'm one of the more finesse ones I was talking about before. I'm not one of the ones that run up the middle and do all the hard stuff. So I'm one of the thinkers and that type of...
You're more of an observer, you strategise.
So I think all those combinations make me, I suppose, the reason why I'm the captain. But it's something that, I suppose it's something that I've had to work at, and probably hasn't come easy because it's something that I've never been wanted to be the centre of attention. My wife organised a birthday party, surprise one for me one year, and I can't cancel it. And I found out.
You're just preaching to the choir.
It wasn't
me
me.
now.
I wouldn't never do that now, but that was the kind of the headspace I was in years ago. Like I said before, I went to the clinic. I just really was, shy. Just didn't want anything about me and that. So I've definitely changed in a lot of ways. I still have some of those challenges, but I've learned how to manage them better. I still get a bit anxious when I go into a packed room, whether it's a restaurant or a room, or even the shops on a weekend. Obviously when you play sport, you're on TV or you get recognised a little bit. I still find that, I know I've been doing it for 14 years and I still get a bit uncomfortable when I do that now, just because in the back of your mind you just think, oh, who's looking at me? What are they thinking? Are they thinking good things, bad things? Did I play well on the weekend? You're getting judged, I suppose, all the time.
Yeah. And you need time out from that, don't you? You need it not to matter.
Yeah, sometimes, like I've said to my wife, it's sometimes when we go overseas, the UK or somewhere, don't get recognised. I feel like big weights lifted off my shoulders sometimes, and that's not being, what's the word? I'm not on yourself a little bit, thinking that everyone's looking at you all the time or that you're so special. It's more just that when you get recognised or you play professional sport, or you're on the spotlight a little bit, sometimes when someone looks at you, you just never know. And that voice in the back of your head saying, they could be just looking at you, just smiling, just recognising you, or for just a person walking down the street, or they could be thinking, oh, that's the guy that plays for so-and-so, or that he's a good fella, or he's they could be thinking anything. But in my worst times, I probably was always thinking the negative, thinking, oh, what are they looking at? They think I played, didn't play a good game on the weekend, or they don't think I'm a good person, or it was always just that negative mentality I had. So, I suppose we could talk about different things like that for hours, but there's a lot of things I've learnt, and I'm very grateful that I've changed a few things in my life in particular. Yeah.
Do you watch Game of Thrones?
I don't actually, no. It's been around for so long, and there's so many seasons, and even recently I've asked people, should I watch it? And was it the last episode on recently or something?
A while ago, yeah.
Apparently it was terrible.
Well, and the reason I asked,
because
there was a kind of a Jon Snow moment there. I just happened, you were talking about not wanting to lead, and there's a kind of a reference that the best people to be chosen to lead are the people that don't need to nor want to.
Yeah.
Because there's no ego buy-in.
Yeah.
And there's a sense of humility and grace around that, And it's interesting also too, I would say 80 to 90% of the clients that come to work with me are introverted. Mm-hmm. And introversion is something in Western culture that is often shamed and wronged. And, on a scale of 0 to 10, if an extrovert's a 10 and they call it ambiversion, which is kind of a bit of solitude, bit of connection, I'm a writer, when you're in your world or your football, it's a place where you go to for joy and passion, just because there's an ignition and an electricity there, I would imagine. Yeah. And I think when anything we're passionate about, there's just a private current of electricity that brings joy and fulfillment and nourishment, and the rest of the world goes away and you're just in that space. Now, the world needs introverts. Introverts do observe and they do strategize, and it's not about being inferior or superior. It's just, but I think in Western culture, and you'll probably notice when you have two daughters, Mother Nature will diversify. Yeah. I think what works, with my two boys, one's more introverted and one's more extroverted. Yeah. And so, you kind of need to tailor that. But I find for a lot of people that talk about anxiety and that whole coming out of their shell, which, generally speaking, sort of happens organically anyway, but with the absence of, let's say it takes a village to raise a child, there was no village for you.
Yeah.
There's no sort of extroverted granddads and introverted cousins, and there's no other blokes going, mate, you just kind of find your way and do your thing.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you did that major reboot and decluttered a lot of the traffic and the judgment about who you are as opposed to who you kind of feel that you should be. But I think I'm similar to you in some ways. In the absence of feeling that there was anybody in my tribe that kind of really got me, you cut and paste from here and here and here, but it doesn't kind of fit. You've got to, it's an inside job. So I think, it's anybody that's watching this. And it's interesting too that you say that probably not until you did that emotional detox were you ready to captain, because, it's that old, it's that old saying, you've got to be the captain of your own soul. You've got to be able to use your internal compass. Yeah. And especially too when you become a dad and a husband as well. It's it's a whole new bloody landscape, isn't it?
Yeah, I know it's strange. I suppose it's just something that you need to look at inside. I suppose the reason why I think a lot of anxiety come from not really loving the person I was. I had that chip on my shoulder, like I spoke about before, or going to a crowded room or a restaurant or wherever I was going to. I knew I was a happy kid. I knew I grew up. I could see photos, and I knew I grew up somewhere along the line. It changed, and I wasn't sure why. I wasn't sure if it was anxiety, depression, what was going on, but there was something that was just sticking with me, and I had this angry kind of, everything was negative, and it always turned to, not anger. I didn't have an anger problem, but it was just more my anger thoughts to different, if media example, if the media would constructively criticise my game or performance, I would, take that as they're having a go at me and never talk to that person again, not doing that again. It was like cut them off. It was like, I suppose I had trust issues, I guess. Maybe from my childhood, people kind of leaving, either my mum, having some issues, or my grandfather and uncle passing away, like for whatever reason they were leaving my life, and maybe that was the hurt and heartbreak, I suppose. So I found it really hard to trust people. And then I suppose going to rugby league at 18-year-old, I wasn't a popular kid at school. And then all of a sudden you start playing first grade, and you're very popular and you have all these extra friends and people want to hang out and talk to you, and that was probably another thing that showed me how trust is different and changes. And I know this is probably a number of things that shaped me in different ways, and I didn't have these mentors or really good people around me in particular, or I didn't use them enough. I had a great coach in Wayne Bennett. If anyone's watching follows rugby league, they'll know Wayne Bennett, and he's been a big part of my life for a long time. And I had him in my corner, but I never used him enough. I didn't really ask questions. I really didn't confide in him enough. And I suppose that's just being young and being a male. You don't really talk about your emotions and feelings enough. And he tried to pry it out of me sometimes and occasionally, which was great by him, but I still really didn't open up. And sometimes I think age, it just takes time. I think generally takes time. A lot of these things, as a teenager in your early adult years, you're trying to find what you want to do as a career, and then you're meeting partners and whatever. You've got different childhood upbringings. You might have sisters, relatives that are there's so much going on that how do you have time to sometimes work on yourself and really be the best version of you. And unless you've had, even if you've had, like you said before, if you've had the best, model father, mother, brother, sister, and it still doesn't always work out the way you want it to. So I suppose, I'm trying to say, I guess, is that yourself is most important. I think you need to work on yourself regardless of different walk of life you've come from or what you've been through. And the more you work on yourself, the better off, life's going to be.
And I think, that it's a pretty kind of new age saying you've got to love yourself. But I find when I first start working with clients, I say, let's just get you to hang out with yourself first of all. Love's a big jump, and that's a byproduct of time spent. And I see it a lot in elite athletes and and also the very academic clients I work with. So they spend a lot of time doing, which is energy out.
Yeah.
And I remember working with a beautiful young Samoan. He was about the size of bloody Aquaman. He was, a huge, tattooed, magnificent boy, but he was a boy at heart. And he had anger issues. He worked for, he was playing elite football. And he really didn't want to talk to me. His coach wanted him to talk to me. And, he was, because of his anger, and he was becoming violent. And I said to him, there's a beautiful saying, I sat with my anger long enough until he told me his real name was grief. And anger is a part of the grieving process. So my first question to him, and as it is when I work with clients in maximum security prisons that are the angry people, is what have you lost? Because anger is always a byproduct of losing something of value. And to a boy, Dad, that's big. And that sense of loss and that unnamed grief. I have a lot of clients that say to me, I didn't even know this parent. Why is it still pissing me off? Or this happened 20 years ago. Why? What's wrong with me? Why can't I get over it? And I say, because you've still got shrapnel. You've still got some emotional shrapnel in there, and that's usually in toxic dialogue that we've said about ourselves. Why do they leave me? And again, my beautiful husband, his dad died when he was 9. And logically, people generally don't have a say over when they die or leave or whatever, but it's that abandonment. Because a child knows a boy needs a dad to model how to do that. And so it's a really interesting dynamic about being present in this young Samoan boy. He was pissed off that he had to talk to this bloody woman in pink that was rambling on about emotional fitness he didn't want to talk to. And I said to him, there are 3 things that I just need to have a look at. If you can just answer these 3 questions, and that'll help me a bit like, a personal trainer, in finding out where we need to go. So I need to look at tribal support. And he said, I'm in a fucking football team, lady. I'm good for tribe. And I said, no, I need to know in your tribe, though, the tribal support you have is all around what you do. I need to know who's in your life because of who you are. Because if you lose this footy contract or you injure yourself, and you haven't got tickets for the game and you can't drive that amazing car out there and you can no longer afford to keep up, this lifestyle, I want you to tell me in your tribe who would be there if you stopped doing what you do. And he just looked at me, he stood up, and I thought he was going to punch me, but I stood up too, and he said, I don't want to talk about this shit. I'll fucking kill myself if I don't play football. And that's it. I don't want to talk about that. And then I sort of said to him, we need to unpack how vulnerable you are because your life is constructed on what you do and not on who you are. And for people like you and I spent time in a psych ward when I got sober and put down drugs and alcohol because it had conveniently, and there's a use-by date to booze and drugs, and I certainly am not interested in judging anybody. Some people can recreationally use. I'm a raging addict. I couldn't. But when I put booze and drugs down, the sewage of my past that I had compartmentalised, it kind of all thawed out, and I couldn't kind of unpack it. And I had to spend time a bit like you, detoxing off a lot of the inner dialogue, because I've had a lot of dangerous people in my life, but the most toxic person I've ever had in my life has been me. And you and I both know that the most powerful healer that you can have in your life is also you. But that whole, with your little daughter, when she's got it wrong, or she's in trouble, or she needs to go to bed early, or she needs you to hold her hand because she's been a good girl, or she's being a brave girl, or whatever else. Because she doesn't have a fully formulated sense of self, she looks into your eyes and she uses the mirror of, a bit like our dogs do. We only have to look at them and they know they're a naughty boy. They can feel that energy. And they use that reflection, that mirroring of, I've got you, or you're safe, or I'm cross with you, but I love you, that kind of blend. But when you don't get that, trying to change your self-talk, and this is why I write books, because I have clients to come and work with me, and some of them have had sexual violence like I've had, or physical violence. And I always say the most insidious form of trauma is verbal abuse that we inflict on ourselves. And that takes years to detox, which is what you were talking about, that whole detox, and you're obviously a work in progress. You're obviously now, as you sort of said, because you didn't know yourself, it's very hard to even like yourself, let alone love yourself. So if you don't know yourself, it's like, well, how do other people see me? And if when we're alone with ourselves, we see this, well, I'm not speaking for you, but I know I would just see this person I was disappointed in because I didn't know how to do shit. I didn't know how to have relationships. I could have a physical transaction, but not an emotional relationship. My self-judgment was the stuff. And that sounds like, where you did a lot of your detoxing as well.
Yeah, I think I had a lot of negative talk and doubt, I think. And I suppose I think I really do relate it all back to my childhood. I just think not feeling good enough or not feeling, I suppose self-worth in myself, feeling I was, even I suppose rugby league, I suppose, was a big, it was like a saviour when I was early on. That's probably one thing that when I didn't have that family or I was jumping between houses and whatnot, I really focused on rugby league and it was my one goal and it come true. But then I suppose at some point I needed to change. Rugby league was number one and family and friends and everything else was number two. So when rugby league probably I didn't have a good game or it wasn't going the way I wanted it to go, then my whole life come
you're vulnerable.
I put everything into it.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to, I suppose, differentiate that or even I didn't really know how to have a support network, I guess. That's one thing I learned in the clinic about having a support network or a system or people around. And it can be anyone, it doesn't have to be family. It can be, mentors and coaches and nurses and doctors, whoever you trust, I guess. And that was one thing I suppose I really needed to change and grow that circle around me, I guess, and let them in as well. But, yeah, I mean, we'd lose a game on a Friday night. I wouldn't leave the house till I had to be back at training on Monday. I didn't want to see anyone, didn't want to walk past someone on the street and have them say something or ask me about the game or have a go at me or whatever, even if that probably wouldn't happen, but just thinking that might happen. And there was one point, I think, when I was in Newcastle in particular, we lost 5 or 6 games in a row, so probably, I wasn't leaving the house too much. And I started being the last one to get to training, the first one to leave. I felt like, in the end, like rugby league was part of the problem in the end, because I made it the saviour, and then all of a sudden, when that wasn't going the way I wanted to go, it was probably the problem as well. I think that's what I really struggled with, because it'd given me everything. It was that one thing that got me out of my, bad thoughts or negative times or harder upbringing, whatever you want to call it. But then when that was giving me grief, I was like, well, what do I have now? And I kind of obviously put a strain on my relationship with my wife in particular, and close friends obviously, and it was just a spiral I couldn't really get out of, and I needed professional help to change it.
Yeah, and that whole it works. There's a use by date to that kind of external life, and people either do a reboot and start to do the internal work, or they just, we call it swapping the witch for the bitch. They use their sporting or their career and they start doing something else that has that external distraction. But I think it's interesting that you spoke about isolation a lot, and my work's called emotional fitness, and it's all about connection. Yeah. But the thing is, when connections have been consistently fractured, when you're born without a connection to your biological dad, and your connection with your grandfather, and connection with your mum, and when those connections are consistently fractured, our reluctance to connect is kind of like a self-preserving mechanism, because it's the grief. Yeah. And if you haven't been given, and you and I know as parents, and your heart's going to break the first time your daughter goes through a breakup. Yeah. Because he's going to be the only one. He's going to be, that was her crack at 14 for happily ever after. Yeah. And we know for any person, no matter what age they are, when the heart breaks open and it ends, there's a lot of, you really need a lot of care and support in the grief. And so often grief and sadness get called depression. Yeah. And they're kind of not. Yeah, yeah. Learning how to cry and sit with it, as you will sit with your daughter, and I had to sit with my sons, and certainly not diminish the fact that this was real for them and this was big. Yeah. But I think once our children know that grief is finite, tears are medicine, if you're crying, you're healing, and I've got you. And this will take as long as it takes, but you're going to get to the other side, because if you can do your grief homework, you can emotionally cope with anything. But people like you and I that haven't had a backlog of grief by the time we hit adolescence, and then we didn't have any tools for it, we often end up in those, places where you need to do a reboot. But thank God, I always sort of say, at least with doing that, you've at least got a starting point, and that dialogue with yourself now, you're going to be a very different parent to who you would have been had you not gone there. So you just got back from Fiji, you were just saying.
Yeah, I was
recently.
very lucky. We had a week off for the season and went to Fiji, and it was just it was a close trip. Obviously, my wife's pregnant, so it's not too far to go. And
how far?
She's 20 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah. So and then the little one's almost 4, so she loved kids club and swimming and beach,
beautiful.
pool. So
yeah,
it's just obviously it's a great little spot for families, and it was just a good little reboot
Getaway.
in a different way.
Yeah. Just in little tribal family time.
So, and I suppose going back to not having much of a family myself. That's what I think I'm really enjoying the most, is building my own little family, and kind of I can use the tools that I didn't have, or things that I've learned that I really wish I had growing up, which is siblings and a stable family, and I've learned a lot over the years. So I think I'm looking forward to passing that on into my family, making sure that my little one feels loved, and she has a sibling, and she's going to soon, and just make our family pretty special. Because my wife didn't have the best upbringing either, so we don't have a lot of support outside of us, so we kind of make it up as we go together, and I think we do a pretty good job. But I think that's I think we kind of have that same thought process, that there's things we definitely changed in our upbringing. So kind of that's how can we kind of make sure we're doing the best job to make sure that our little ones don't feel that way, and making sure they're really enjoying their family and they feel like they can talk to us and open up, and hopefully we can help ease some of those pains you were talking about before, relationship breakups and your first broken heart, and anything you go through really, like not getting a job out of school, or whatever it is. There's heaps of things you go through, challenges in life, and hopefully we can soften the blow from all our I suppose life lessons that we've learned.
Yeah. And I'm different from a clinician. As I've said to you, I'm a lived experience person, and I always say to clients, when you go and talk to a clinician, they can't have an agenda, and clinicians are very, very important. And there are many clients that come to see me that need clinical care, but the word therapist is a Latin word, and it means attendant to the soul. Yeah. And I remember saying to my therapist, my boy's going to need a shitload of therapy, because when mothers got handed out, I didn't have a lot of tools, and they said, well, he said to me, therapist is a healing word, and in tribal cultures, the grandparents and the parents were the therapists. They would sit there and what you're learning to do is be an attendant to the soul and a lantern bearer, and when their life is dark, to turn the light on. And I think I do say to my clients, I can help you perhaps find some light switches, because we all come with this GPS. A lot of us don't know how to use it. And in adolescence is when that yellow light, that anxiety light, means go within and find out where your light switches are, find out where your dark places are, download some new apps so you don't get lost. Because with that GPS, you're going to get lost taking cues, cutting and pasting out there. But I also say to them, I have an agenda, and that's that you get to have a crack at your happily ever after. Yeah. Because we scoff at that in this day and age. It's some sort of bloody fairy tale myth. And I say, well, I'm sorry, I think it's your birthright. Nobody holds their newborn child and says, well, you don't deserve a happily ever after. And that being first and foremost your relationship with yourself. Yeah. Unless you've got a capacity to, and I like to talk about the yin and the yang, the masculine and feminine. Yeah. Regardless of your gender, you're masculine. You've got to be able to stand up, speak up, provide and protect for yourself. You've got to be able to do that as a young, as an adult. But you also empathise, nest, nurture, and be kind to yourself when the shit hits the fan, and there are some people like you and I that need to go into a clinic and have a tribe of kind people going, we got you. You're doing a reboot. This is the shitty part. Once you learn how to do one reboot, you're going to be okay. Yeah. You're going to fall over. And that detoxing from the critics out there, I say to clients, divide the world into a third. A third of the people that you meet are just going to love you. They're just going to they're just going to get you. Yeah. A third of the people you meet will go, Cynthia who? Oh, yeah. No, I could take or leave her. Didn't impact me either way. And the other third are going to go, she drove me fucking crazy. I wish she'd shut up. It doesn't matter if you... It's just the way it is for all of us. But I think when we don't get a lot of direction in our formative years, we focus on what we're getting wrong, because many introverts are they abuse themselves with perfectionism.
Yeah, that was me for sure.
Yeah. Like, I've got to be perfect. Because, I'm a high achiever, I'm a high stimulus personality, and if I'm not doing perfect, well, fucking let's just end it now. I'm off the planet. I was a suicidal teen, like, if I can't get this perfect, I'm not going to have a crack at it. Yeah. But, what we need to teach our children is personal excellence is very different to perfectionism, because perfectionism is a form of self-abuse, as you sort of said. And many people I work with, they reach the top of the tree, they get the national award, or they win the grand final, or they get the gold medal at the Olympics. But that's not enough.
Yeah.
It kind of makes it harder.
Sad in a way.
Yeah.
I think that's one way that it drives you to get to be the best in your field. But then a lot of us and whoever perfectionists are, you don't really know when that switch off point is, because you get to that point, you win that that achievement, and then what's my next goal, and it goes higher, and it ends up being too high, and you can't reach it, or you're never satisfied, because when you actually get it, you're thinking, oh, it's not as not as good as it was made out in your head, or whatever you thought it was going to be. And that's what I think perfectionism can be very good in one way, to strive and get to a certain level, but I think you got to know when to kind of switch it off, or when not enough's enough. But I suppose what a healthy being perfectionist is, like a healthy part of it, because I think it can be, on one hand it can get you really high and get you where you want to go, and you set your goals and you can achieve amazing things. And on the other hand, it can be a bit of a bring down, I guess, and really, I suppose, hamper where you want to get to, just because it's unattainable. It's not. No one's perfect. No one can get to where they want to get to. I suppose another thing too, when you were talking about therapists before, I generally think everyone should have a therapist. If you think about, you think about your physical health, and we're all meant to exercise and train and eat certain foods to fuel your body. I just think, why wouldn't you want to do that for your mental health, or for your brain, and to have that self-love and be the best version of you? We're all getting pulled from different people or jobs or things going on in life, but I think it's really important to take time out and have that connection with anyone that just wants to make you the best version of you, because no one's perfect, no one has all the tools. And sometimes when I see my therapist now, sometimes I go there and there's nothing negative to talk about, which isn't a bad thing, but it's just good to go there and have a chat, whether it's about good, bad, or indifferent. You're just having a chat, unpacking, as you call it, and getting it off your chest. And sometimes you think, it actually reminds you, actually I'm going pretty well, because I didn't speak about this, there was no negative there, nothing that was great, that's actually really good. Well, when do you really go through those, I suppose anyone that's spoken to a therapist would probably understand, they ask you a lot of questions and different things, and when you keep answering, that's pretty good, I've been good, and all that, and you kind of think, when you leave the session, you're going, I'm doing pretty well, and that's not the time to take your foot off the pedal, but it's just a constant reminder that, we need to pat ourselves on the back when we're doing well, not just to bring ourselves down when we're not doing the good things. When something's going not the way you want it to, it's a bit negative, we're always quick to judge ourselves, but to really pat yourself and be proud of yourself when you do well as well, I think that's the key. And it's self-love. And I just thought, when you were speaking about a therapist before, I just think, I hope that people are changing their thoughts on, I'm just going to see my therapist, and I have a chat with my therapist, or I've got a meeting with my therapist, it's not a negative, it's not a bad thing. It's
like going to get a massage.
It's probably, you're winning, really, to be honest. If you're doing it and someone else isn't, you're ahead of them, because I guarantee you're going to be learning things, and you're going to be better off inside your own brain and space than probably the person that isn't seeing one. So it's definitely a positive, not a negative.
Without a doubt. I've got people that say, I've been clean and sober 24 years, but my therapist lives on Maloney Mountain, and I have people saying, why are you still seeing a therapist? And it's because I kind of don't have, I'm 57, my boys are married, or one of them's married, and I'm a mother-in-law now, and I haven't got an app for this. Mm-hmm. And I'm like you, I drive up there and think, I don't know what I'm going to talk about. But she also says to me, and I've had males and female therapists, and it's been very important when I first started my work, because a lot of my trauma was with disconnection with males. It was very important for me to have that cross-gender connection and learn how to talk to a male about intimate subjects and get a male perspective, because males, and I'm not being sexist here, it's just a different vehicle, there's a different lens. Testosterone forms the brain differently. And then as years passed, I've moved over. I had a male psychiatrist in the beginning because I had chronic post-traumatic stress, and he was brilliant, spent years with him. And these days I work with a psychologist, and it's a gentler kind of female dynamic. But I think you touched on a really important point. Again, in the absence of a tribe, the therapist is the attendant. And they don't actually have an agenda like your mum and dad do, because they're there just for you. And I'm happy to pay good money to my therapist, because, again, it's the tragedies and the triumphs. And if I've interviewed a few men, and one of the gentlemen I interviewed earlier today was sort of saying to me, because he's been working with me one-on-one for a few years, and he's just kicking goals and things, and he said to me, do I have to give up my spot? Should I be not seeing you anymore? Because I just kind of come, and I really like come to see you, but I feel like, because I have, and I said, no, this is your spot. I've had a grandmother, I wouldn't tire of telling her how great things were or how hard things were. And if you haven't got that, it's really lovely to have that. Confessionals have been around for years. It was a form of therapy. I'm not going to get into the Catholic Church, but it was a form of privacy, and being able to emotionally download those intimate details. And the detail, I'm sure with your wife, when I have worked with couples and they say, there's really petty detail, I feel really bad about talking about this stuff. And I go, well, difference between good and great is detail. You ask any Olympian, you have a great meal or great pair of shoes. It's the detail, it's the care. And in relationships, whether we're parenting or it's with our partner, it's the private detail that makes it great. The way, they know how to hold your hand, or how you like your cup of tea, or how you like to sleep in on a Sunday. It's that care and that detail that makes it quality. And as you sort of said, those just times where you turn off the world and you just hang out, we talk about date night, we talk about family night, but therapy's like date night with yourself, I kind of reckon. You get to just hang out with yourself and invest in your emotional superannuation. I agree with you. I think it's a really important component of self-care that there's just been too much shame and stigma about, but it really kind of keeps you emotionally detoxing. Yeah. Nothing builds up, gets too much. You don't get into overwhelm. Well, we've had a good old chat today. Thank you. Was there anything else that you'd like to add? We've been kind of strangers until today, but thank you so much for being so generous and donating your time for this. And we'll launch this during Queensland Mental Health Week. And I always said, I get asked to do a lot of talks around the country, but I always like to work in my own backyard in Brisbane, because it's kind of like if everybody worked in their own backyard, the world would be a better place. And so, I was just really touched when the Brisbane Broncos captain wanted to come along and just help us with this little community service. I really appreciate that.
Oh, for me, I'm always happy to help out, and I needed a simple change in my life, and I wish I had some people close to me, or even just hearing and listening, different people speak about mental health, or a bit more awareness around it and talking about it, and reaching out, or all that type of stuff, I suppose. So it's something I do pretty regularly now. I go to schools for the club, for the Broncos actually, and do talks around mental health and my challenges, and a couple of key messages around support and gratitude and different things. So, and the more we talk about it, the better, and if one person's watching this and they go seek some help, or they have a family member that's in trouble and they think they see some signs and symptoms they might be able to help them with, and we're doing a good thing. So I'm always happy to help and talk about, and I think lived experiences are probably the best sometimes, because everyone these days on social media, YouTube, wherever you're watching things, it's all about the realness of it and seeing someone going through it, like living through something, or really seeing that person opening up their heart and speaking about some really challenging times. And you can, we all can relate to different challenges. We all go through them. It's a roller coaster life sometimes. It's just about the resilience of, I suppose, bouncing back as quickly as you can from some of the challenges you go through. So, the more you share your stories and lived experiences, the more people might, reach out and ask for help themselves and get on to living a happier, healthier life, I guess.
And you and I both know intimately that isolation is very different from solitude. And when we isolate, we disconnect. And isolation is really, I always think, did you see that movie with Tom Hanks on Castaway? When he was on, and he had the bull Wilson that he was chatting to. We are tribal creatures hardwired for connection. And our mental health suffers if we don't connect. And, I know it's a Hollywood movie, but Tom Hanks had food and shelter. But he didn't quite cut it talking to Wilson, that bull, and he risked it all to go and connect. And I think, what you and I both know as being unashamed introverts and people that do kind of want to stay away from the rest of the world, that what we know is anyone watching this that's in their jammies who's been isolating. So isolation corrodes self-respect, and it's fear-driven. Solitude, which is things we do that actually builds our self-respect, but it gives us time to reboot, make sure that we're not running on empty. For introverts, we need more solitude time than an extrovert, quality time. And we know sitting here that there will be people watching this that haven't spoken to anyone for a few days. But, you know, the beautiful thing about the internet, I don't do social media. I find minding everybody else's business will send me crazy, and then I just start comparing myself, and I always conclude that I'm the fucked one. So social media is just not good for my sanity. But I do work media, and this is work media, because I think the internet's a beautiful place to get information and to get connection. You know, and that's what we're offering here for anyone watching this, that if they're isolating, and they can, you know, the beauty of YouTube, you can send me a message, and if there's something that Darius has said or I've said, you know, that you'd like us to answer, we might see how we go, and we might come back and do a series 2, and we can address some of that. But you're not alone. Oh, there's a beautiful Buddhist saying, we're all alone together. You know, I mean, that internal journey you do have to trek. But, you know, we're all doing it together, and to offer a bit of light is a really kind thing, so that you don't have to end up like we did, you know, crashing. And I ended up in a psych hospital with one of those really unattractive gowns on at the back, you know. So you kind of don't wait till crisis.
No. You get it before that's for sure.
Thank you so much for your time, and all the best with the birth of your next little girl.
Thank you. It's exciting. Can't wait.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Bye.